While the membership of Congress is getting more diverse, the senior staff making the most important policy decisions is still mostly white and male. LaShonda Brenson is a senior researcher at the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies and has been studying this issue. LaShonda, welcome to the program.
Hi, Mimi. Thanks for having me.
So take us through some of the numbers as far as black staffers on percentages total among Capitol Hill staff and then senior staff.
Sure. So we do research on top staff. So when we talk about top staff in our research, we're specifically speaking to chief of staff, legislative directors, and communications director. So in our recent report on the Senate side, we found that people of color represent about 40% of the U.S. population, but only 11% of senior staff of color on the Senate side. And among Black staff, that percentage is only about 3% on the Senate side, although African Americans make up about 13% of the U.S. population. And we find similar numbers on the House side, especially if we look at white Democrats and Republican offices, although diverse members of Congress employ a high number of diverse staff in their offices, at least on the House side.
So senior staff, you talked about chief of staff, legislative directors, communication directors. What are those positions responsible for?
Yeah, a lot of people are not necessarily familiar with these unelected congressional top staffers, but they play an essential role on the Hill. Specifically, these staff members provide policy expertise. They act as surrogates for members of Congress. They can only be at one place at a time. And so they really help to supervise their congressional offices, hire and fire employees in their offices. And they really have a lot of power and influence because, like I said, the member can only be at one place at one time. And so they do a great deal as it relates to assisting members with policy decisions, but also helping constituents in member offices, for example, in district offices, access federal benefits when they have trouble. A lot of times they go to their district offices for assistance, and their staff assist them with those getting access to those services.
So, LaShonda, Democrats have a higher percentage of Black voters than Republicans. Is that reflected in higher percentages of Black staffers for Democratic lawmakers?
Yeah, so that's a good point. So a lot of people think, oh, okay, you know, basically this must be a Republican problem, but this is a problem for the institution overall. So a Pew study found that 37% of registered voters self-identified as Democratic voters who are non-white. But if we look at Democratic offices, that percentage for diverse top staff is about 20%. But that is not necessarily reflected. You know, there's almost a 20% percentage point difference between that. So you can see that there's a big gap. However, if we look in Republican offices, people of color make up about 14% of registered Republican voters, but they represent about 4% of top staff. And so that percentage, at least on the Republican side, is actually closer, relatively speaking. And so that's why we emphasize in our research that this is a bipartisan issue that must be addressed institutionally overall.
So I want to go back to the insurrection of January 6th. You know, some people carried symbols of white supremacy and racism when the insurrectionists stormed the Capitol. What lasting impact has that had on Black Hill staffers?
Yeah, I mean, especially given that the public hearings on the Hill is going to start this Thursday, this is a big issue for staffers still. We work with a lot of groups, and we formed a coalition called Capitol Strong to provide resources and just the opportunity to speak to staffers. And one of the things that we did in working with staffers, we helped them put together a letter from the Congressional Black Associates and the Senate Black Legislative Staff Caucus, in a letter that was featured in the New York Times, basically talking about the difficulties that they face as staffers and how hard it has been since January 6th. And so this is still a problem that they're facing, just given the cases and the hearings are about to occur on the Hill this week.
What about the gender divide? You know, the experience of women of color on the Hill, and any impact as a result of the vice president being a woman of color?
So if we look at the data across chambers, women of color make up about less than 6% of chief of staff, legislative director, communications director. However, if we look at the census data, we see that women of color make up about 20% of the population. So you can see that there's a big discrepancy in between those numbers.
So what are your recommendations then to both encourage more hiring of Black Hill staffers and to better support them once they're there?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mimi. So the issue and the reason why this has persisted for a long time is that, congressional staffers receive low pay, and, this area is very high in terms of cost of living. And there's somewhat of an insular culture on the Hill that makes it hard for diverse aides to actually build a career on the Hill and to not only get their first job, but to actually sustain themselves on the Hill. And so there's a number of solutions that can be employed. For example, improving the pipeline so that when the staffer gets on the Hill, that they feel supported and they can build a career. Increasing the pay for all congressional staffers. They shouldn't have to have second and third jobs to make ends meet. And so they should receive a livable wage, and that way they can feel comfortable staying and building a career on Capitol Hill longer. And there needs to be more investment into diverse staffers in terms of building their career. So once they are on the Hill, how can they be supported to where they can get a lot of training and opportunities for growth when it comes to being promoted over time into senior roles.
LaShonda, we're out of time. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much for being on the program.
Thanks for having me, Mimi.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future Government Matters interviews.